Hey everyone, today we'll be talking about the hip joint. This presentation has been facilitated by Katie, Lianne, Claudia, and John Paul. Hope you learned something. So we'll begin our discussion today by first getting into what the hip joint is. Its scientific name is the acetabulofemoral joint. The name originates from the bones it is comprised of, so the acetabulum of the pelvis and the head of the femur. The articulation of these two bones allow us the movements found at the hip. It's considered a ball and socket joint, as the femur head, which is considered a ball, sits securely within a rounded out socket, which is the acetabulum. Next, we'll get into the anatomical and structural joint classification. The hip is a synovial diathrosis joint. This means that it has a wide range of movement and that it uses synovial fluid to lubricate the joint to reduce friction. Being that it is freely movable, it allows for movement in all three planes. And those are sagittal, frontal, and transverse. The functional movement that we chose for our presentation is walking up the stairs. The hip movements that occur when stair climbing are hip flexion and extension. During the starting position, we stand in a neutral position with both feet flat on the floor. When ascending, to take the next step, you must raise your thigh towards your chest, and this creates hip flexion. To propel your body upwards, you must extend the hip. This occurs after hip flexion when you push off the step. The typical range of motion for hip flexion while walking up the stairs is typically between 10 to 70 degrees. So here we've provided a couple pictures that just demonstrate the hip flexion that is found while walking up the stairs. On the left-hand side, the first picture shows the starting position, so the neutral position of JP standing with his right leg planted on the step. And you'll see that it's at 0 degrees. Now, when we move into hip flexion to go onto the next step, as I said before, the range can typically go between 10 to 70 degrees. But in this photo, JP looks like he's in about 45 degrees of flexion. And that's just based on the size of the step.
Convex on concave. The arthrokinematics of the hip joint during flexion follow the convex on concave rule. The convex femur head is spinning on the surface concave acetabulum, meaning the primary movement is spin. Muscles of the hip joint. Flexion, iliopsoas, iliacus, psoas major. Extension, gluteus maximus. Abduction, gluteus medius. Adduction, adductor longus, adductor brevis, adductor magnus, and gracilis. Internal rotation, gluteus medius, gluteus minimus. External rotation, gluteus maximus. Prime movers of hip flexion, iliopsoas, iliacus, psoas major. Special features, triaxial movement, ball and socket joint, which helps with our balance and gait. Open packed contact is the optimal articular contact rather than the closed packed contact. Femoral triangle, inigual ligament superiorly, the adductor longus medially, and the sartorius laterally.
Split squats is a eccentric type of exercise which is also a closed kinetic chain exercise. It improves lower extremity range of motion, stability, balance, and it also works on single leg strength. For split squats, so first begin by standing with hip width apart, back straight, core engaged, and hands on hips. Second, take a big step forward with one foot to initiate the squat stance. Rest your back leg on the floor or on an elevated surface to increase the difficulty. Third, begin lowering down to bring your hips into 90 degrees of flexion. Note, make sure the front leg's knee is bent and the foot is firmly planted. Bend the back leg's knee until it almost touches the floor. Hold position for about 3 to 5 seconds, then rise in a controlled manner by pushing through the front foot. Repeat the same leg for the duration of the set, then switch to the other leg. So the parameters is 1 to 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps and 30 seconds rest period between sets, and you'll do this 3 times a week. Knowledge check. What is the scientific name of the hip joint? Is it femora acetabular joint or acetabulofemoral joint? 2. What joint classification does the hip fall under? Is it synovial or cartilaginous? Third, what muscles are prime movers for hip flexion? Is it gluteus medius and minimus or iliacus and psoas major?